Parliament is reeling from Theresa May's decision to delay the crucial vote on her Brexit deal.
It is clear that while there is broad support for many of the key aspects of the deal, on one issue, the Northern Ireland backstop, there remains widespread and deep concern.
Today, the Prime Minister will appeal to EU leaders in a bid to rescue her plan. We'll untangle what it means and what happens next.
Really is one of those Brexit days where everyone's scratching their heads and wondering what it all means. We're at Derby Market Hall this morning. It's Ted and Robert here on the fruit and veg stall with me. We're going to be looking at what here people are making of what's happening in Westminster.
Yeah, the continued uncertainty caused the value of the pound to fall against the dollar and euro. I'm going to be looking at the reaction from businesses.
Also for you this morning, the father of murdered backpacker Grace Mullane has visited the place where her body was found on the outskirts of Auckland.
Make or break for Liverpool and Tottenham in the Champions League tonight. Napoli travel to Anfield while Maurizio Pochettino sharpens his Spurs in Barcelona.
You would do well to watch your words.
I will not be scolded by my inferior.
Rivalries in history. Margot Robbie and Saoirse Ronan tell us about playing Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots.
Good morning. It's a chilly start with some frost for some of us this morning, some patchy mist and fog. Here, though, when that lifts, there'll be sunshine. But for most of us, we're looking at a cloudy day with some drizzle. I'll have more in 15 minutes.
It's Tuesday, the 11th of December. Our top story this morning, just after 8 o'clock, Theresa May has begun a whistle-stop tour of the EU in a bid to rescue her Brexit deal. It follows another dramatic day in Westminster as the Prime Minister announced that she was delaying the vote on the plan. There was silence from her own side and laughter from the opposition. The deal she'd insisted could not be changed or replaced would now be modified and delayed. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake has been looking back at the events and should warn you that this report does contain some flashing images.
Can you really improve your deal, Prime Minister?
Theresa May arrived back at Downing Street last night after a day of drama in the House of Commons. She confirmed the vote on her Brexit deal would be delayed and that she'd go back to Brussels to ask the EU for changes. The Prime Minister told MPs she had no doubt her agreement was the right one, but acknowledged widespread concerns about a plan to avoid physical checks at the Northern Ireland border if a trade deal can't be done.
It is clear that while there is broad support for many of the key aspects of the deal, on one issue, the Northern Ireland backstop, there remains widespread and deep concern.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn accused the government of being in disarray and later in the evening called for an emergency debate.
It cannot be right that the government can unilaterally alter the arrangements once this House has agreed on a timetable without the House being given the opportunity to express its will. The public, Mr. Speaker, will look at the behaviour of this government and how it treats their democratically elected representatives with despair.
The Speaker agreed and MPs will have up to 3 hours to air their views. Then something you don't see very often at all. One Labour MP lifted the mace, the symbol of Parliament's authority, in protest at the government's decision. The EU has suggested it is ready to talk, but the Prime Minister needs more than words to win over some of her own MPs back home who want changes to the deal itself. Jonathan Blake, BBC News, Westminster.
Our political correspondent Chris Mason joins me now. Chris, I know that Theresa May is soon to arrive at The Hague. We understand the Prime Minister there has arrived on bicycle already,
yeah,
I think.
very Dutch.
Mr. Rutte.
Yeah.
So we'll get pictures of that when that comes through. But first, let's talk about this. I mean, scenes of chaos, extraordinary, remarkable, just some of the words that have been used to describe what's happened.
Yeah, it was an incredible day because there'd been this countdown going on for days and days, minister after minister saying the vote would go ahead, the Prime Minister's official spokesman saying at 11 o'clock the vote is on, and then source after source after source saying it would be postponed, and then yes, lo and behold, the Prime Minister standing up in the Commons and saying it would be postponed. And now she has this incredibly difficult task of trying to extract some sort of compromise, some sort of concession out of the European Union that is enough to convince a vast number of MPs over our shoulder there in the Commons that they're willing to change their mind and they're willing to endorse the deal. And as we found out on breakfast this morning, there are plenty on the government benches and on the opposition benches who simply don't buy this.
I spoke to Ian Blackford, leader of the SNP earlier, at Westminster, leader of the SNP at Westminster, and he absolutely determined that a vote of no confidence should be the next move, with the support or with being led by the Labour Party.
Yeah, so the opposition parties and some Labour MPs want to see a vote of confidence in the government. Labour's leadership at the moment are hesitating, and I think they're hesitating bluntly because, well, as the motivation for the Prime Minister's vote yesterday, or the postponement of the vote yesterday, politicians want to win votes when they call them, and there is a nervousness, I think, among some on the front bench of Labour that they might not be able to do it, that it might be the one thing, the only thing in the air that would unite Conservative MPs in saying, hang on a minute, we really don't want to see this to happen because we don't want to see a general election and we don't want to see Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. Now, any opposition that thinks it can win a vote of confidence would absolutely call one. I don't think they're quite there yet, and also, and any opposition would always want to do this, if they think a government can be allowed to squirm for a bit longer, why not let them squirm? And we know just how deeply, deeply uncomfortable at the moment things are for Theresa May.
I think we can hear what he said a little earlier on, actually.
This idea that she's going to get concessions is fanciful, and some would say it's perhaps even insulting to the European Union. What she's trying to do is kick this into the long grass and make sure that Parliament doesn't get a vote where she knows that her plans were going to be universally voted down.
So that was Ian Blackford there. Chris, we're going to be talking a lot more over the next few days, few weeks, I think, few months even, and we're going to have lots more conversations with MPs this morning as well to just get some reaction to what's been happening. And as Chris mentioned, Theresa May travelling around Europe's capitals with talks for other leaders after this decision to postpone the Commons vote on the Brexit deal. She's going to visit The Hague. She's supposed to be arriving there now as I speak, Berlin and Brussels, to see what help can be provided in selling this agreement to MPs. Let's talk to our Brussels reporter, Adam Fleming. Adam, it's going to be so interesting to hear the view from there over what's happening over here.
Yeah, and we're getting some views this morning because the European Affairs Ministers from across the EU are here in Brussels for a regular meeting this morning. They're not actually talking about Brexit officially, but they have to because we keep asking them about it. And the Danish Foreign Minister summed it up pretty well, actually. He said the UK has to tell the EU what it wants, and the EU is prepared to help, but they're only prepared to help in the sense that they will issue some clarifications or some interpretations at a political level about the deal that has been done. They're not prepared to change the substance or the details, especially when it comes to the controversial Irish backstop. And the Vice President of the European Commission, the organisation that runs the Brexit talks day to day, summed it up saying there's a deal on the table and it is not going to change. We didn't hear anything from the Dutch Foreign Minister who arrived a couple of minutes ago. I think he's probably going to leave the talking to his boss, who's seeing Theresa May any minute now, and nothing from the Irish Europe Minister, Helen McEntee. Interesting that Theresa May hasn't managed to schedule a stop-off in Dublin yet, because they're going to be crucial in all of this, because the big stumbling block at Westminster is still the Irish border. And behind the scenes, the EU's plan B is to carry on planning for no deal in case this all collapses. And there's going to be a summit of EU leaders, so it will be the big bosses here on Thursday and Friday. That wasn't going to have Brexit on the agenda at all. It's now been added by the chair of the summit, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk.
Adam, thanks very much. Adam Fleming there. We'll have lots more coverage here from Westminster throughout the morning. For the moment now, I'll hand back to Dan in the studio in Salford. Morning, Dan.
Morning, Nagga. Thank you very much for that. It's not just Brexit we talk about this morning. Obviously, that dominates things. That's our main story. But just approaching 8:10 on BBC Breakfast, let's bring you up to date with some of the other news around on this Tuesday morning. And the father of murdered backpacker Grace Millane has visited the place where her body was found. That's in the outskirts of Auckland. David Millane took part in a traditional Maori blessing ceremony alongside Grace's uncle and members of the police force in New Zealand. A 26-year-old man has been charged with her murder. Let's get more from our correspondent, Hal Griffith.
This has been another heartbreaking day for the Mullane family as Grace's father and uncle came here to visit the site where her body was found. Now, alongside the detective who's led the investigation into Grace's murder, they took part in a traditional Maori blessing service in the undergrowth in the place where she was found. Flowers now mark that location. Members of the public have also been bringing their flowers here to show their compassion towards the family. Although the forensic teams have finished their work at this site, we've seen other officers working through the dense woodland nearby, looking for any signs of disturbance, any evidence left behind as they build their case against the 26-year-old man they allege murdered Grace. And as part of that, they've issued a new public appeal for anyone who's found a shovel, a hardwood red-topped shovel, which they believe could have been discarded after Grace's disappearance. Now, that sense of shock over Grace's murder is still palpable here, and there are plans for candlelit vigils to be held in Auckland and in other cities across New Zealand as people come together to show their compassion for Grace's family.
6 people believed to be from Iran have been rescued from a small boat off the Kent coast. The lifeboat left over at around 3:30 this morning, and Border Force brought those 6 people to shore. It's the second boat to arrive this month. Numbers have dropped from last month due to bad weather. Guidance to help transgender people mark their transition and rededicate their lives to Christianity will be announced later by the Church of England. The advice was approved by the House of Bishops, and it makes clear transgender people should be addressed by their chosen name. The Church of England announced last year it would consider a special service through, though this guidance does not contain any new liturgy. Scientists are warning that newly discovered melting glaciers in East Antarctica could cause significant sea level rises around the globe. The region has long been considered stable and unaffected by some of the more dramatic changes occurring elsewhere on the continent. Incredible pictures, aren't they? But images from NASA show that ice streams running into the ocean along the eastern coastline have actually sped up in recent years. It's been one of those years of real TV highlights, and news and current affairs programmes have been dominating the most tweeted about BBC shows of 2018. This is according to figures from TV licensing. Question Time, Andrew Marr Show and Doctor Who, you won't be surprised to hear, all took the top 3 spots. But BBC Breakfast, we're very happy to say we found out today, largely because of this fellow, Mr Bushell, make number 8 on the top 20 list. And do keep your tweets coming in throughout the morning. I know a lot of it is Brexit-based today. But oh, that was strange, wasn't it? Louise is back, hopefully just before Christmas, by the way, from her triathlon. But do keep them coming in, and you can email us. You can keep the discussion going on Facebook. We're bbcbreakfast@bbc.co.uk, and you can find us on social media as well. Now, we're going to go back to Westminster, but just to let you know, in the last few moments, Theresa May has just met the Prime Minister of Netherlands, Mark Rutte. There was a handshake, as you would expect, outside the doors in The Hague. And let's go and speak to Naga now, because Naga, she's on this sort of whistle-stop tour, isn't she? You were mentioning earlier. She goes to Berlin after this, and then to Brussels. And while the Prime Minister is trying to sort of seek reassurances over the next 24 hours or so, there is so much to discuss back here in the UK about what took place yesterday and what might happen now.
There really is extraordinary scenes yesterday, Dan. I don't think any of us could really quite understand how quickly things were changing. One thing which could stop Theresa May's Brexit plans, that's one thing, a motion of no confidence from the opposition. We've been talking about that with Ian Blackford, who's the leader of Westminster for the SNP. So far, we were hearing from him, although he has a meeting with Jeremy Corbyn today, Labour has resisted calls to table one. That's just one of the options that people are looking at now. We can talk to the Shadow Business Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey, who joins me now. Good morning to you. You would have heard me talking to Ian Blackford earlier, saying he had a meeting with Jeremy Corbyn about this potential vote of no confidence. When's it going to happen?
Well, we're discussing this with various parties across the House, and what we need to do is judge the time at which a vote would be most successful. We've heard the DUP stating yesterday in the debate that they would think about a vote of no confidence after Theresa May has returned from Brussels in her attempt to seek assurances or renegotiate. So we'll have to judge the best possible time. But in terms of timings, as I say, we are discussing it with various parties across the House.
She is doing the debate. She is looking now to get support, to shore up support in Brussels and in The Hague and in Berlin. She's doing this whistle-stop tour. Why don't you give her a chance?
Well, yesterday, I think she held Parliament and indeed the British public in contempt. We were all set up and ready to have this vote on her deal. She was telling Remainers that it was a choice between her deal and no deal. She's been telling Leavers that it's a choice between her deal and Remain. And then at the 11th hour, because she knew that she wasn't going to have the support in Parliament, she pulled it. And now she's going to Europe in a very weak position. She's got no mandate from Parliament to suggest what she needs to attempt to renegotiate on. And when she was pressed on that yesterday by MPs across the House, she simply said that she was going to seek assurances on the backstop. Now that's very different to renegotiating, and there's a number of issues that we take concern over, from workers' rights all the way through to the way services are dealt with in this agreement, and the fact that the political declaration that's supposed to set out our future relationship with the EU is ambiguous, to say the least.
We can see Theresa May in The Hague now, actually. She's just arrived, and we're showing you pictures to our viewers now of her meeting Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister there, as she goes to try to negotiate, try to get some form of compromise, some form of support. Donald Tusk has tweeted, Rebecca Long-Bailey, about helping in the ratification process. There seems to be a change, a nuance from the
Well, he said
EU.
he's helping the ratification process, but I think he also said something along the lines of that the withdrawal agreement was not open to renegotiation. But the problem we've got here is that Parliament didn't debate this. We were due to have another whole day of debate today, where the Prime Minister would have heard the concerns of MPs from across the House, both those that had problems with the backstop all the way through to the other issues.
That is going to
that
happen,
I've talked
though.
about.
It's been postponed. It hasn't been cancelled.
Well, we haven't had a date as to when it's going to come back to the floor of the House.
It's going to happen, though.
Well, that's another problem. Is it going to be before Christmas, after Christmas?
What does it matter?
Who knows? It does matter, because at this time there's a lot of uncertainty, and the main argument that I've been putting forward from my position as Shadow Business Secretary is that businesses need certainty, and all of this chaos, and this hasn't just been today, by the way, this has been over the last 2 years, is damaging our economy. We need to know what direction we're travelling in, and we need the Prime Minister to listen to the concerns across Parliament and across the country and get a deal that puts the economy first.
The direction of travel is one to Brexit. That is what the majority of people voted for, those who did vote. That is what Theresa May has said she would do. That is what she is working to do. It seems as if you are determined that Brexit will not happen.
No,
that is not democracy.
No, that's not true at all. What we do is respect the referendum. We want to get a deal that puts our economy and jobs first, make sure that we have a floor under existing rights and protections, but not just that, a guarantee that we'll go further than that. We want a strong single market deal, and we haven't seen that from the Prime Minister at all.
Ian Blackford, who's the leader of Westminster for the SNP, said that he was meeting with Jeremy Corbyn. His ultimate goal is a people's vote, another referendum. Are you going to back that?
Well, as I say, our priority is securing a deal that makes sure that we put the economy first, and we haven't seen that from the Prime Minister. We had a motion at our recent Labour Party conference that went through a number of different scenarios and stated that in the event that we couldn't get the deal that we wanted and we tried every other option, then all other options would be on the table, and that included a people's vote. But at this time, we want Theresa May to come back to Parliament with a deal that Parliament can coalesce around. We respect the referendum, and we know that people are fed up of this chaos and uncertainty, and we need to know what's going to happen.
I tell you
next.
what I hear from you. I hear, if this happens, if that happens, then this could happen, that could happen. That doesn't seem to be any more clear.
What I am clear on, Naga, is that we have to have a deal that is put to Parliament, that Parliament can coalesce around, that puts our economies and puts communities like mine in Salford first, preserves jobs, ensures that investment takes place and ensures that we have a bright future. That's what we're fighting for in the Labour Party. It's something that the Prime Minister isn't fighting for, it seems, and she seems to be all over the place, and we're in quite a shambolic position today, quite
Do you think
frankly.
Jeremy Corbyn is the man to take us through Brexit?
I certainly do. I certainly
Why?
do. I think he would have a completely different approach to Theresa May.
Who's he going to negotiate with if there's no negotiations to be done?
Well, we have a completely different set of negotiating priorities. The Prime Minister set out her idea of a deal in the Chequers Agreement. It was laughed out of Europe. She's now come back with a half-baked deal that doesn't satisfy anybody. It doesn't even bring people in her own party together, and that's what her intention was ultimately. We've been clear on what we want, and we know that we can get support from across Parliament to get that through.
Rebecca Long-Bailey, thank you very much for joining me. Shadow Business Secretary there. We're hoping to speak to Andrea Leadsom a little bit later on. It's chilly, Carol. My fingers and my toes are cold. Make it go away. Morning.
Bless you, Naga. Good morning. Naga is quite right. It is a chilly start to the day. If you're looking outside and it's sunny, you've got clear skies, That's where it's particularly cold. And we have, of course, got some frost across parts of Scotland and northern England. But a fine start for you. If you've got patchy mist and fog, it will lift except for from the hills. Now, that's the exception because for most of the UK today, it is a cloudy picture. We've got high pressure across Scandinavia, so this weather front's fairly weak. And this one, which is more active, is really bumping in against the high pressure over the next couple of days, not making much progress, and it too will eventually weaken. So the brightest skies, northern Scotland, through parts of northern England, heading down towards the Midlands and the southeast. North and East Wales also seeing some sunshine today, but for the rest of us, cloudy. The clouds thick enough here and there for some spots of drizzle, and you can see our weather front not making a huge amount of progress. You may well see some splashes of rain later across the Isles of Scilly. Now, through this evening and overnight, there still will be a fair bit of cloud. It will remain broken in parts across northeast Scotland and eastern England, and this is where we're prone in rural areas to see a touch of frost. Our weather front, meanwhile, makes a wee bit of progress, and you can see too how there will be some heavier bursts of rain connected to this, but it's going to weaken as we go through the course of tomorrow. So talking of tomorrow, we start off with some bright skies where we've got the frost, but tomorrow what you'll find is the high pressure in Scandinavia exerts a bit more influence, so it will brighten up for a lot of England and East Wales. For Scotland, it's the northeast, favoured once again for some sunshine, and you can see quite a bit of cloud for the rest of us, but some of that will break. The sunshine will turn hazy, and you can also see where we've got a weak weather front by then. As we head into Thursday, a cold start for many of us. There'll be some frost around. One thing you will notice about Thursday is it's going to be windy. Another weather front out towards the west, not doing much more than producing some thicker cloud and also the odd splash of rain. Temperature-wise, well, we're looking roughly 5 to maybe 7 or 8. But when you add on the strength of the wind, how it will feel against your skin, it will be much colder than that. So we're looking at temperatures around about freezing, just above or indeed just below. That's how it will feel rather than what you'll see in your mercury. Then as we head on into Friday, another cold start to the day, fair bit of sunshine around, brighter further north, and it's going to be the next couple of days. Some cloud coming in at times across southern areas, and then we still have weather fronts trying to penetrate this area of high pressure. Temperature-wise, 4 to about 7, but it won't be as windy, so it won't feel quite as bitter as it's going to on Thursday. Dan.
Carol, I'm not going to ask you about White Christmas yet because it's far too early, but what about the sort of longer-term forecast? Is it going to be particularly cold this December?
Well, before we even talk about that, Dan, on Saturday there is a potential for some snow. Now, originally we were thinking snow across Scotland and northern England. At the moment, and this could change, it looks like it could be across Scotland and not just on higher ground. Couple that with some wind, and on the hills, once again, we could be looking at blizzards. So we're not out of the woods yet. OK, thank you very much for that, Carol. See Carol a little bit later on. Another forecast coming for you around about 8:45 this morning. It's one of those mornings gone quite quickly. Well, you might not think, you might not think, but I do. Anyway, set in the 16th century, a new film explores the power struggle between two female rulers in a male-dominated world. Mary, Queen of Scots, looks at the relationship between Queen Mary of Scotland and Elizabeth I. The actors Saoirse Ronan and Margot Robbie have been telling our arts editor Will Gompertz that the costume drama has modern parallels.
Mary Stuart is condemned to death.
Saoirse Ronan is Mary, Queen of Scots. Margot Robbie plays Queen Elizabeth, her English cousin. It's thought the two monarchs never actually met.
Has prevailed. If you speak of it to anyone, I shall deny.
But they do in an emotionally charged scene in the Josie Rourke-directed film, which they talked to me about at the National Portrait Gallery in London, where the two queens now hang together.
So, Mark, how did you feel about taking on Elizabeth, the role which has been played so many times by so many different actresses?
The short answer is yes, I was terrified, but I'm very glad I did it, and I stayed away from watching anyone else's portrayal. To begin with, I'd said to Josie, like, I'm not the right actress for this, I didn't go to university, I don't have a degree, I didn't do theatre, I'm not classically trained, I'm the wrong kind of actress to play a queen. And she said, I don't want you to play a queen, I want you to play a young woman. And that unlocked the character for me in a big way.
What have you produced in all your travels between our kingdoms? Discord? War? Death?
It's so timely as well, because like we've got Nicola Sturgeon up north, we've got Theresa May down south, and there's essentially, our film is mirroring the same sort of dynamic that's happening between north and south right now, and these two women in particular.
Do not play into their hands. Your heart has more within it than the men who counsel you.
You do well to watch your words.
I will not be scolded by my inferior.
You're inferior. The more I started to learn about her, the more sort of outraged I was that so many accounts in history had painted her out to be this sort of young, way in over her head girl. To see the tenacity that this woman had and how she just had it for so long, and like it wasn't, I mean really in order to restrain her they had to come up with lies about her and put her under house arrest for 18 years because she was just unstoppable.
This film is a classic costume drama to sit back and enjoy. But the way in which the story has been told, with Mary and Elizabeth constantly undermined by meddling men in a divided country at odds with itself, makes it resonate today in a way a lot of modern dramas simply do not. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
Looks fascinating. At 8:26, we've got a packed morning still to come for you. Another 45 minutes of BBC Breakfast, where we are talking a lot about Brexit and what happened yesterday with that vote being cancelled in Parliament. Theresa May is today, right now, in The Hague, meeting the Dutch Prime Minister. She then moves on to Berlin and then to Brussels. And we're trying to gauge reaction and see what might happen over the next few days. We'll be live in Westminster with Naga very shortly, and we'll be in Derby as well. Charlie is there. This is the Derby Market Hall this morning. It's all very Christmassy, as you might be able to imagine. Charlie's going to be there, gauging reaction there and seeing exactly what they think about what might happen over the coming weeks and months. And Westminster as well, where Naga is based. Beautiful morning in London this morning. We've got a number of guests lined up for you there this morning as well. You're watching Breakfast from the BBC. We've got the national headlines coming your way very shortly. But time now for the news, travel and the weather, wherever you're watching.
Up next on the BBC News Channel, a look at what's happening in the world of global business with Business Live. And in half an hour, it's the news at 9 with all the latest stories.
Hello there, good morning. Today is going to be another fairly quiet weather day really across the UK. Plenty of dry weather around this morning. We've got some clear spells across eastern areas, so there was a touch of frost first thing, but for many of us it's going to be fairly cloudy. And you can see from the satellite imagery earlier on, we had those clearer skies across central southern parts of England, across eastern England in particular, northern and western parts, that's where there's more cloud, and a few spots of drizzle perhaps over the higher ground of western Scotland, Wales and the southwest of England, and that's where you'll keep a lot of cloud into the afternoon. Towards northeast Scotland, down the eastern side of England, a bit of sunshine here. Temperatures, though, about 5 to 7 Celsius. The higher temperatures actually towards the west, so 11 degrees there in Belfast. Now through tonight, we'll continue with a lot of cloud. Eventually some rain will move its way through Northern Ireland, a bit of patchy rain into West Wales, southwestern parts of England. Maybe a few drizzly showers in central areas as well. Again, some clear skies in the east, but temperatures just about staying above freezing into Wednesday morning, 2 to 4 Celsius here. Again, the milder conditions in the west, 8 or 9 degrees. Now that rain, or the patchy rain in the west, is just associated with that weather front, that cold front, but it's moving into high pressure, so it's weakening all the time. And really, through Wednesday, while there'll be some spots of rain across the west, it will mostly clear away. Lots of cloud again, likely, but there'll be some sunshine again towards eastern parts of England, northeastern Scotland. Later on, a few breaks in the cloud developing elsewhere. Temperature-wise, around about 7 to 11 degrees Celsius once again. But as we go through Thursday and into Friday, we pick up a southeasterly wind, and there'll be a drop in temperatures, 6 or 7 degrees on Thursday. By Friday, 4 or 5 degrees Celsius. But with that fairly strong southeasterly wind, we'll have to factor in the wind chill, so it's going to feel colder than that. Bye-bye.
Some days of the week are just different. Get your fill of tech, travel, sport and documentaries. Weekends on the BBC News Channel.
This is Business Live from BBC News with Sally Bundock and Ben Thompson.
A pounding for sterling after the British Prime Minister postpones the key parliamentary vote on her Brexit deal to avoid a crushing defeat.
We're live, we're in London. That's our top story today, Tuesday, the 11th of December. Theresa May is heading to Europe to seek further assurances about the Northern Ireland border plan, but can she persuade EU leaders to renegotiate the agreement? Also in the programme, Chinese stocks get a boost from the news that Beijing and Washington have held talks, at least on the phone, about the next stage of their trade talks. And the markets in Europe, well, that's a nicer picture, isn't it? They're all headed upwards for now. We'll talk you through the winners and the losers.
Also coming up on the programme, how a trip to a Thai beach that was drowning in plastic sparked a new business idea to cut the impact of plastic waste. We're going to get the inside track from the man behind metal cans of water. And as Barclays launches an app to let customers turn off certain types of spending to keep gambling, drinking or other vices in check, we want to know, will it work? Let us know. Use the hashtag #BBCBizLive.
A very warm welcome. So we begin with Brexit yet again, the pound taking a beating after the UK Prime Minister postponed a key parliamentary vote on her Brexit deal in the face of a crushing defeat. Theresa May today now is meeting with EU leaders in The Hague, in Berlin and Brussels to try and rescue her Brexit plan. But senior EU officials have already warned they won't renegotiate the agreement. So what's the reaction among UK business leaders to all of this? Well, we have built a word cloud. It's been created to convey some of the key concerns in the corporate world. And you can see some of these big words here, including no deal, businesses, delay, deal, uncertainty. Specifically, the director of the British Chambers of Commerce, Dr. Adam Marshall, said firms are looking on with utter dismay at the ongoing saga in Westminster and expressed concern politicians are seemingly acting in their own interest with little regard for the millions of livelihoods that depend on the success of the UK business and trade. And we've got this now from the head of the Confederation of British Industry, Carolyn Fairburn. Unless a deal is agreed quickly, the country risks sliding towards a national crisis. Ben.
Sally, thanks very much. Well, let's speak to Ross Denton, who's with me. He's a trade partner at Baker McKenzie. Ross, morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. Welcome to Business Live. So what strikes me about all of this and what we've heard over the past sort of 12 hours is that Theresa May wants to go back to Brussels and say, give me something that will help me get this vote through. What does she want?
Well, I think at the moment she's very clearly stuck in a little bit of a balance. She can't open the renegotiations or ask for renegotiations to be opened because that will risk the other side actually looking to get more things out of the deal. So, for example, Spain with Gibraltar, France with fishing. So what she can really only really do is ask for reassurances or assurances, sort of adding to what we've currently got and saying, can you put some clarity in that will help assuage people that are concerned about, for example, the backstop.
Yeah, and it is the backstop that's probably one of the key sticking points, isn't it, as far as getting those votes that she needs in Parliament. And you've sort of touched on it there. I mean, we've heard from the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, saying you can't start to renegotiate a little bit of it, be that the Irish backstop, without unravelling all of the other things. You can't just pick and choose these things in isolation.
Correct. So I think once she opens that, it's effectively a Pandora's box. Everything starts all over again. We really don't have the time to do that. So she's really looking to add things or political statements to the current text that will explain issues in that current text.
We also know that Brussels will lay out or has laid out its stall and said, look, there is no negotiating on this. This is the deal that is available. Either vote it through or don't. Do you really think she's got a chance of getting any concessions in Brussels?
I think she might get some additional wording and some additional political statements that explain parts of the current agreement. I think it's very unlikely, and don't forget we don't have that much time left, to renegotiate significant portions of the deal. And of course the backstop has been the one that has been the most contentious. Most of the other issues are in the withdrawal agreement, I won't say flew through, but were quite easily agreed. It's all this time has been really around the backstop.
Now we know the Labour opposition party in the UK are very angry that seemingly this can just be changed, the vote can be delayed and pushed further down the road. What do we know about the timing of what happens next?
Well, Mrs May doesn't really have any other dates to live up to now. She's got her deal, so really all she needs is at some point to get Parliament to agree to it. So, frankly, she may be looking at the idea of pushing it to the wire and then hoping that people will say, well, it's either her deal or no deal, and take her deal.
Quite a negotiating strategy. Ross, thank you very much for now. I'm sure we'll talk about this again. Ross Denton, their trade partner at Baker McKenzie. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's one thing I can see. We will talk about it again. Let's look at other business stories now. France's President Emmanuel Macron has promised a rise in the minimum wage and tax concessions after recent protests in Paris. He said the minimum wage would go up by $115 per month from 2019 and the planned tax increase for low-income pensioners would be cancelled. But he's so far refused to reinstate a tax on the wealthy, saying it would weaken us.
US chip maker Qualcomm says it's won an injunction against Apple that effectively bans the import of a number of older iPhone models into China. The order, issued by a Chinese court, is the latest development in the feud between the two tech giants over intellectual property. Well, Apple says all of its iPhone models, though, do remain on sale in the country.
The Indian currency, the rupee, has fallen by over 1% against the US dollar, this after the surprise resignation of the central bank chief, Urjit Patel. His exit comes after reports of a rift between the Reserve Bank of India and the government. Mr. Patel said he resigned for personal reasons. The move, though, does appear to have unnerved investors.
And a Canadian court has adjourned for the day with no decision on whether to grant bail to Meng Wanzhou, the chief financial officer of Huawei. Ms Meng, who awaits a ruling on her extradition to America, faces accusations that she misled banks about Huawei's control of a company operating in Iran. That put the bank at risk of violating US sanctions.
Now let's stay with China because the main markets in Shanghai, they were given a bit of a boost today on the news of a telephone call between officials in the US and China on trade.
Who knew a telephone call could make such a difference? Yeah, but of course that call between two world powers, China's Ministry of Commerce said officials set a roadmap for the next stage of consultations.
Let's talk to Robin Brandt. He is in Shanghai for us. So who was calling who?
Well, apparently Li He, who is China's vice premier, the man leading the trade talks with the Chinese delegation, made the call to the man who is now his American counterpart, Bob Lighthizer. Robert Lighthizer is the US trade representative, a man who's been a lawyer for some 30 years and seen as much more hawkish in terms of his stance on how China needs to change. America's Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin was also in on the call. Now, investors are feeling more positive because at least they are talking, particularly in light of Meng Wanzhou's arrest at the request of the Americans in Canada a few days ago. You just mentioned that. She's the Huawei chief financial officer. That has gone down very badly here in China. So the talks about talks is being seen as positive, and the roadmap, get used to hearing a lot of reference to that. Remember, this is in the context of a 90-day period where the escalation of tariffs on the US side on goods coming to the US from China has been frozen, and there's now 79 days left, I think, by my calculation, until March the 1st. And that's a period in which the US and the Chinese side need to talk about the talks, essentially, and work out what they can agree on, and it appears that process has started.
All right, thanks a lot, Robin, there with the story that moved markets during the Asian trading session. Let's look at the numbers overall. So you can see that Japan was down by 1/3%. It didn't manage to lift Japan into the positive territory, but that was not the case for Hong Kong, Shanghai, other markets in Asia, given a lift by that news that Robin's just mentioned, and also boosted by the fact that Wall Street closed higher as well for the first time in a few sessions. And again, the story is that in Europe as well, markets higher across the board. Don't forget, yesterday Yesterday, they all closed down. Most of European markets down over 1.5%. London was down by 0.8%, the FTSE 100, but the FTSE 250 having a very difficult session, domestically dominated because of Brexit, etc. Big mover today for the FTSE 100 is WPP. Its shares up nearly 7%. The new chief executive, Mark Reed, outlining a new strategy for WPP. Of course, he took over from Sir Martin Sorrell, so WPP doing well today. What's happening on Wall Street? It's up to Michelle Fleury to fill us in this time.
The boss of Google is headed to Washington. Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai will testify to Congress this Wednesday. He's likely to hear accusations from Republican lawmakers that its search algorithms are biased against conservatives. There is also plenty of scope for him to clash with lawmakers on the left and the right over a major data breach that exposed the personal information of Google Plus users, and also the company's plans to build a censored search engine in China. Expect Boeing to be in the spotlight because the aircraft maker is in the middle of a recovery plan for its top-selling 737 jetliner. Now, the company has said in the past that its efforts wouldn't pay off until the end of the year. We'll find out if that's true when it reveals the number of plane orders and deliveries for November.
That's Michelle Fleury there in New York with a take on what's happening on Wall Street. James Bevan now, who's joined us, Chief Investment Officer at CCLA Investment Management. James, morning.
Good morning.
So let's talk Brexit briefly, and we'll get on to other, maybe more exciting stuff in a moment.
Brexit is exciting if you live in Britain, I tell you that.
It's been going on quite a while. I think it's probably the view that most will say. But let's talk about what it means for certainly the currencies, but also what bond markets tell us about their sort of perception of all of this.
Well, very clearly, the currency markets say that we don't want to be in the pound. We have sold the pound down. You will find that there are some people who believe that there is a reasonable chance that we see euro-pound parity in the period ahead if we get a no-deal Brexit. So that would be truly scary, actually. But good news for exporters, even if importers and the public would have a lot of problems.
Some are saying there's going to be big swings in the markets until we know what is actually the deal that's going to be agreed upon, because you've got three big, strong political groups pulling in all different directions, and that will mean lots more volatility.
I don't share that view. I completely accept that equity volatility generally has been elevated and will remain so. I don't, however, believe that the UK will be a special case on the downside, because so much of the bad news is already baked in the cake. So I would suggest that really there are three groups in the UK market that we should think about. There are the utilities and the regulated entities that Mr Corbyn has already said that he will either nationalise or be horrid to, and they've been caned pretty poorly already. There are then the domestic businesses, and they are going to struggle in the uncertainties that we face. And then there are the global businesses, the Diageos, the Unilevers of the world, who benefit from a weakening currency, and which I believe are well placed in a global context to do very well.
Let's talk UK economy, though, because we had growth figures yesterday, leaving us sort of on track. If we get a fourth quarter figure of about 0.4%, what, 1.3% over the year, that would be pretty terrible growth, the worst since the recession, right?
Well, we have
unemployment figures today.
We have lots of problems in the UK economy. So we have a deficit at the household level, deficit at the government level and at the corporate level, and we have a current account deficit, meaning that we import more than we export. None of that is a recipe of good news for the UK economy, and I put it down to the compositional problem. We just don't make enough to sell, and that has to be changed radically over an extended period. There are no instant solutions to the problems of the British economy.
Yeah, and they may only get worse. Let's see how things pan out. Nice to see you, James.
Great
for
to
now,
be here.
Thanks so much. James will be back to talk us through some of the other paper stories, including Barclays, that is launching an app for your credit or debit card that will turn off certain types of spending. So if you can't resist going past the bookies, maybe going for a pint down the pub, then it will stop you spending in those establishments. Let us know what you think of that.
Now, how a trip to a Thai beach where there was huge amounts of plastic sparked a new business idea to cut the impact of plastic waste on our environment.
See what we did on the screen there? It's all related to cans. We're going to get the inside track from the man behind the metal cans of water. Stay tuned for that. You're with Business Live from BBC News.
First, though, let's get specific about some of the movers today on the market. So Carpetright shares up nearly 4% right now in London. That's despite the fact it's reported widening losses to £11.7 million, despite slashing its costs by some £19 million.
Yeah, you may remember the firm's been closing stores, all of that in an attempt to try and stem its losses. So let's speak to Neil Wilson, who follows the firm's performance. He's with us this morning. Neil, nice to see you.
Good morning.
Look, it's an interesting one, is Carpetright, isn't it? Every time we get an update, it sort of tells us a familiar story that it's trying, but it's not really succeeding very well.
Well, it certainly struggled over the last couple of years. I think obviously the sort of consumer headwind